just, okay, I'm gonna let folks in. Hello, hello. I'm just gonna wait like one more minute just to see who else joins us, but we'll get started shortly. Yes, hi everyone. Yeah, I'm just gonna admit some more folks in. Thank you all for joining us this Friday evening. Yeah, I think we can get started. So I just want to greet everyone. Thank you so much for coming to Periplus and Galleyway's panel on applying to fellowships, residencies, and workshops. It's really great to have you here. And I just want to give a special thanks to our panelists for joining us tonight. So my name is Camille Wanliss. I'm a Periplus 22 fellow. I'm also the founder of Galleyway, which is an online resource that champions diverse voices in poetry, literature, television, film, and theater by spotlighting monthly opportunities for BIPOC writers. So there are currently opportunities on the website now, so with March deadline, so be sure to check that out. Yeah, I'm really excited to host and moderate this discussion this evening. This is a topic that's very near and dear to me. And these three fantastic panelists will offer more insight into applying to and attending residencies, fellowships, and workshops. So what I'll do is I'll just start by introducing them, and then we'll kind of move on into the discussion. If you happen to have any questions during the event, please feel free to put them in the chat. You can also wait until later when we open up things to a Q&A. And so at that time, if you want to use the raise hand function to let me know that you're interested in asking a question, you can do that as well. And just FYI, this event is being recorded. So if you choose to state your question out loud, it will be included in the recording for mentors, fellows, and finalists who couldn't join us this evening. So without further ado, I'll introduce our panelists. Second. Right. I'm just letting some more folks in. Hold on. Sure everyone's in. So I'll begin with Kim. Kim Coleman Foote is author of the debut novel, Coleman Hill, which fictionalizes her family's great migration experience. Born and raised in New Jersey, she has received fellowships from the Fine Arts Works Center in Provincetown, the NEA, NIFA, Breadloaf, Phillips Executor Academy, Center for Fiction, and Fulbright, and residencies at Yaddo, MacDowell, and Hedgebrook, among others. Her fiction and essays have appeared in the Best American Short Stories 2022, The Rumpus, Prairie Schooner, Quelly, and elsewhere. Next, I'll move on to Diana. A poet and multimedia artist, Diana Khoi Nguyen is the artist of Root Fractures and Ghosts of, which was a finalist for the National Book Award. Her video work has been exhibited at the Miller ICA. Nguyen is a MacDowell and Kudamon Fellow and a member of the Vietnamese Artist Collective, She Who Has No Masters. She's received an NEA Fellowship and awards from the NY 92Y Discovery Poetry and 2019 Kate Tufts Discovery Contest. She teaches at the Randolph College Low Residency MFA and is an assistant professor at the University of Pittsburgh. Let me just admit some more folks. Next, I'll move on to Anna. Anna Q is a Chinese-American writer. Her critically acclaimed debut novel, Made in China, A Memoir of Love and Labor, was named a New York Times Editor's Choice pick and nominated for the 2022 Catalyst Award. Her essays have appeared in Three Penny Review, Lumina, Cartica, and Quelly Journal, among others. She was a 2023 UNLV's Black Mountain Institute Sharing Fellow and has received support from Yaddo and Ragdale. She holds an MFA in Creative Nonfiction from Sarah Lawrence College and recently moved to the Denver area with her partner and their 2 cats. So thank you again to our distinguished guests for being here. I think I just want to start off by saying that workshops, fellowships, and residencies play a vital role in helping writers hone their craft. They can be utilized for professional development opportunities, for networking, but the process of choosing and applying to one can often feel rather daunting. So even the idea of a fellowship itself, which is sort of multifaceted, right? It could be a residency. Another fellowship could offer tuition-free access to workshops or seminars. It could be a mentorship program in the vein of Periplus. It can even include on-the-job experience at a publishing house or literary journal. So a question that often comes up, especially for emerging writers, is how do I know when it's the right time to apply to a residency or fellowship? So I'd love to hear from our panelists about their trajectories as poets and writers. What kinds of opportunities did you apply to? Where did you find them? And how did you judge if it was a good fit for you and if it was worth your time? So anyone can start. Anna, do you
I
mind?
can jump in.
Okay.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for being here. It's such an honor, pleasure to be a Periplus mentor. I love this organization. So I think it really depends on the opportunity, because some of them, there's generalities to all of them, but some specify different requirements and so forth. So, one thing is just reading the guidelines and seeing what they're requesting. But I would say, like, in general, if you're doing a residency, fellowship, workshop, or more with the residency fellowship, that you're more established, you have maybe at least a partial manuscript under your belt, or stories, poetry, etc., under your belt, because if you're doing a workshop, that means that you're getting feedback on your work, so it should be at a state where you're ready to actually let other people see it and give you feedback. And then if you're doing a residency, you're actually creating work there, and they can be super competitive. So, your writing should be at the level where it would be competitive for you to get accepted to an opportunity. But there might be some other residencies where, they will take people who don't even necessarily consider themselves writers. They just want to kind of experience to go away somewhere, in community to write. But I would say in general, they're expecting more high caliber writing. So all of you, if you're a fellow, you've gotten into an organization like Periplus, I would say that your writing is of the caliber to get accepted to a residency. So I would encourage you to do it if you haven't, to apply.
Awesome.
I love on a panel how on a panel of women, there's a lot of like trying to make sure we give space for other people to talk. Anna, did you want to go?
No, you go for it.
Okay, I saw that you unmuted, so I was like, go for it, go for it. Kim, thank you for that. I love that you just defined each of the terms because we can't assume that everybody knows. Um, I'll speak a little briefly here about trajectory. I remember, I think the very first time I encountered a residency, I was still in my MFA and a faculty member had just forwarded one to me. I guess it was one of those weird, obscure ones where like only a select number will nominate, like a student to do it. And so I was like, who am I to say no if this opportunity is coming my way? And so I went and did it, and it was just it was just an okay experience. It was in the Catskills. There was only 2 people, myself and another writer, and the other writer was really nice, but I don't think I was ready for it in that moment, like, because I think, Camille, one of the questions you had sent for later is like, how do you know when you're ready? But I think I learned a little bit like, oh, okay, I, I shouldn't just say like yes to everything. I should think about like what would actually be useful for me, but I didn't even know. But I would say a really pivotal moment for me was I had this like fellowship in my MFA, and a fiction writer, a peer friend, was applying for Breadloaf, right? This is like, what year is this? Maybe 2011. And it was back then, I think maybe it was all still done by paper. You had to mail it in. You had to mail copies of stuff in. And I was like, what are you doing? Why are you making these copies? And she's like, oh, I'm applying for this weird thing. It used to be a waiter fellowship. And I was like, what? You have to be a waiter? And I remember I was so confused. And she's like, yeah, I don't understand. It's really competitive and it's supposed to be really good if you do it. And so I was like, okay. And I was like, well, when does it due? And she's like, today. So I ran home and we both got in and we were roommates and it changed our life. It's kind of a funny story, actually.
Wow.
I mean, it was grueling. I mean, I'm so glad that they got rid of that particular line of fellowship because it was so problematic. But I'll say this, it changed my life. I didn't even know what it was, right? But it changed my life because I wasn't connecting with a lot of people in my program. It was a big program. I went to Columbia. But when I went there, I found myself now in this different community where nobody, I don't know how to describe it, where everybody was so supportive
Mm.
of each other. And I hadn't encountered that. I'm not saying that the people I went to school with were rude or competitive, but it just wasn't the same vibe. Where everybody and everybody was so accomplished because like if you looked up everybody's bios, it was like so and so has done this and this. And I think I had actually I don't maybe I had published like one poem, and like people had done so much. And I remember folks were like, oh, after my reading, they were like, you should apply for these things. And I was like, me? Like, really? Like just, I had no sense. And I was like so flabbergasted of support, of like sharing resources. That's why it was life-changing. Instead of people just kind of like being quiet and not saying anything, it was so encouraging, like with no strings attached. And I would I would look up some of these opportunities and I'd be like, no, I don't think I'm ready for that yet. But I would flag it for later, right? So I tried to answer that question maybe a little bit like how I kind of fell into it, and then I had to calibrate to figure out, oh, is this right for me? And I do want to talk later because I've had toxic experiences at residencies too, which have made me really wary to go and not just default to doing it. But I really want to hear what Anna has to share. So thank you.
Thank you. So I would say, I think residencies are also hard when you have a full-time job, and I know a lot of people are constantly working. So for me, I started applying to residencies pretty early on. I remember getting into the VCCA one and then being like, oh, actually, not only do I not have the money, but I can't take the time off. So I ended up not going the year that I got in. And I remember that it really took me a long time to figure out how to navigate. And I think there is really a tiered system no matter where you are on your path as a writer. So for me at the time, I had to publish a couple of essays, and I was publishing pretty slowly because I was working on a memoir, and I was like, I don't know how, like I'm working on this memoir for like 10 years, and like nobody's seen this memoir. Nobody even knows I'm working on this thing, and I'm trying to get into residencies. And eventually I ended up going to one of my first residencies was actually called Porches, which is in Virginia. And it's a great little, you pay to go, but you can pay for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And it's sort of any artist. There's still an application process, but it's not competitive. And that was really nice for me. It was like, in my 30s, I ended up doing quite a few residencies or retreats, they're called, first. And then it was sort of hard to find, 3, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, because I had a full-time job and I really couldn't afford or figure out how to navigate that. So it wasn't until my book came out, and honestly, I wasn't getting into the big ones where they were free anyways. And I was like, oh my God, nobody wants me. And I've been applying for years and years. And then after my book came out, everybody wanted me, which is ridiculous and really unfair. Suddenly, like the doors open and everyone was like, come, we want you. And my first big residency was actually Yaddo, which is incredible. I went there for 5 weeks because at that point it was like, post-pandemic and I'd been laid off and I had all this time and I didn't know what to do with myself. And for 5 weeks, I just smiled every day and just went, and it was this gorgeous, wonderful experience that was, as Diane was saying, really life-changing. And on one level, I was like, oh my God, I'm writing on Sylvia Plath's desk. I better come up with something. And then I was like, Sylvia Plath, please inspire me. Muses of all muses, help me. So I also think residencies are really incredible because they also have that kind of energy. You're like, I've been applying for years and years, and not only am I investing my time, but they're investing in me. And so I want to make sure that I also take advantage of that. And it opens so many doors, I mean, for example, I went to Yaddo 2 years ago and I'm still reaping the rewards from it. You have like your cohort, and then one of my cohort is at a university in Virginia, and they're having a lit fest, and he's asked for me to come this year, so I'm going in October. So there's lots of ways in which also those opportunities, it leads to other opportunities, leads to random things. And that's another reason you want to take advantage of like that sort of network. It's a great opportunity to meet other artists. And I will say, for me as a nonfiction writer, I think the genre is kind of, many of us are sort of homebodies. And so it's great, I think, also for my writing to meet, dancers, composers, sculptors, singers, all sorts of artists that inspire me and help my creativity. And it's sort of a really enjoyable space, and it creates momentum for my art. And I think that is one of the challenges. Many of us are working on 10-year-long or longer projects. And so we need to figure out how to sustain ourselves as artists. And I think residencies and fellowships are those milestones of like rewards of these beautiful moments where it's inspiring us and we're in community with others who are doing the same. And it's just, I can't even, say anything bad about it. But it's hard because, it is a chunk of time. Often they're in places where you're going to have to travel from or to, and you have families and such. There are challenges, but I would say they're definitely worth it.
Yeah, and we'll get into those things as well.
Yeah.
That folks will have some of the things that folks will have to think about before they even start applying to these places. But what I find really fascinating about you all is just your different perspectives. It's kind of feeling like Diana, like, oh, I don't think I'm kind of ready for these opportunities. To Anna, thinking like, oh, I have this opportunity, but I may not be able to go because of I don't have the time or the money. So that's really fascinating. I did want to ask also, like, where did you find some of your opportunities? As well, like what were some of the resources that you went to look into these things?
So,
Oh,
I didn't really talk about my trajectory, but my very first residency, I actually have evidence of it right there on the wall. You can see that leaf there. That's from Hedgebrook back in 2007, I think it was. A friend of mine told me that there's this thing called a residency, and I was like, what's that? I had just finished my MFA recently. I was like, I don't know what this is. And I was like, why would I want to be stuck in the woods and somewhere remote? Like, what? I'm in the city and I'm feeling isolated in the city. Why would I go to the woods? And I went, and it was just like the best thing ever. And I have not been able to get back in to Hedgebrook ever since. But it was amazing. And I was just like, oh my God, I want to be in the woods. I want to be in the woods watching like gnats mate. Never thought that that would be fascinating, but I'm watching gnats mate. Like, this is awesome. So, between my writing network, I also like to mine other writers' bios. So every time I see something, a bio, like what is this fellowship? What is this award? What is this place? You know, because this was like before a lot of things were like online. This is way back in the old days of the internet. But you know, I do want to highlight some major places to find them. So there is Res Artists, and maybe someone can put that in the chat. Res Artists, and then there's the I think it's the Alliance of Artist Residencies, but they have websites where they list a lot of the opportunities, both US and abroad. And they have deadlines also. And I want to highlight Camille's organization because she lists a lot of opportunities on her website as well. There's the creative writing opportunities. It's now like I guess an online kind of blog. It used to be an email list. I got a lot of opportunities from that. Crops, creative writing opportunities, that's run by the poet Allison Joseph. And I really, really like that because she also posts calls for submissions. Most of my publications that I was getting actually came out of that listserv that she used to run because they had so many calls for various different things. So that's where I get, you know, news about the majority of my opportunities.
Awesome. So yeah, Diana was kind enough to post that into the comment section. So if anyone wants links to those, they are there. And Diana kind of touched on this, but I think that's something that often hinders writers from even beginning the process of applying to opportunities is this idea of imposter syndrome, right? They may be plagued with feelings of self-doubt, especially as an emerging writer. They may feel like they don't have enough experience or publications or accolades under their belt. And so did you all or any of you feel this way? Do you still feel this way sometimes? And what sort of advice would you give someone to kind of get over that hurdle to begin applying?
I can start this time.
Sure.
I would say that I always have and probably always will have imposter syndrome. But I think there's, also pros to having imposter syndrome. I feel like it's going to keep me humble forever. Like, I think I'm a genuinely better human being for it because I am, just feeling that I don't belong and everyone around me is also feeling that way. And I think often people are feeling that way. And, I it's hard to say how one deals with imposter syndrome. I don't think it ever goes away. So I think it's something that you have to begin to manage as early as you can. It's sort of a practice, right? And I think, we all go through waves of feeling better about ourselves and about our work. So I would recommend writing that wave. So, after you've published something, after having a good writing day, after a good conversation with a fellow writer who's gotten into something or applied to something, or someone has gotten into a residency or gotten a fellowship, and you're like, okay, well, let me give it a try. And I think those are good moments. Obviously, we can't all push ourselves all the time, but when there are little moments where you think you can, you should.
I can jump in here. Everything Anna said is very wise. People just manifest their feeling of imposter in different ways, right? Not everybody's hiding behind a tree. Okay, so I don't remember what it felt like earlier on, but I guess I shared a little bit. But I can share this. I never feel like submitting to anything. So, or very early on, I would just set aside what I call like my poetry taxes day, my literary taxes day. Like you have to do your taxes. So I have to do my, like, whatever that day is. Maybe it was a day in September. I don't know. And I would like get a friend to do it and we would just sit at the same table. We'd all do our taxes together, but it would be like submitting to things, feeling uncomfortable in the same space. And then it was kind of fun, and then you have snacks afterwards. Because I was like, writing what wave? Wave of feeling good. I was like, when is that wave gonna come, Anna? So I would just have to force myself. And I remember thinking like each year, if I'm able to get into something or do something that I didn't do the last year, I try to level up a little bit. Right. So it was like I think about this all the time. This is actually, I think it's a dude in psychology, Vygotsky. He talks about the zone of proximal development. And it's like we have the center circle, things that you can do. Like I know how to ride a bike. And then there's like things really far out of that circle, like way outside your wheelhouse, like riding a bike with no hands and you're doing a wheelie. Like, I don't know. That's like something I could maybe never do. And then there's like something that's like just next, like riding a bike while holding an ice cream cone. Maybe you can kind of like work at doing that. Maybe, like if you have two hands that work pretty well. And so that's what I would do. Like each year it was like, well, what's the next thing I think I could nudge myself toward or to try to aim for? Of course, not everything moves in like a linear kind of way, but it was just like, how did I always try to push myself just a little bit to be uncomfortable without feeling scared or terrified, And there was no option. I always had to submit something, whether that was to a journal, opportunity, just I had to do it. So yeah, that helped me. And then to do it with somebody else who maybe felt similarly. And then you can like talk about your materials. Artist statement, what is that? Help, etc.
Yeah, and we'll get into some of that later as well. But that's really interesting. Yeah, and I think it's actually really good to do it with someone else because now you have somebody else who's kind of in the same boat that you were in. Yeah, that's really great. I don't know if Kim wanted to add to that too.
Yeah, Diana, I love that notion of the tax. I just did my taxes yesterday. So yeah. And I said I was procrastinating. And later I was like, no, I did my taxes. That was not for I needed to do my taxes. But I've never had imposter syndrome. I'm kind of the opposite, where I had big ego, wanted to be the first person to publish a book in this country at age 12, so it's never, but I'm still humble, Anna. I still remain humble sometimes. But I say like to people who do, because I know it's a very real thing. I say like mind trick yourself, and like think about like lean into like what's the worst fear? You get rejected, right? And it's going to happen. You just have to just recognize that rejection is part of the game. And I always tell people, if you don't play the game, if you don't try to play the game, there's no chance of winning, unless like Anna, like you say, you publish your book and now you get the offers coming to you without even trying or asking for it, right? But if you don't play, you can't win. Can't lose either, but you can't win. And so if you want to think of something like, okay, well, this year I'm going to kind of aim to get 50 rejections, right? Trick yourself. And maybe, okay, like hopefully you won't get 50 rejections, but then up at the next year, I'm going to get 100 rejections. That means that you have to apply to at least 100 or 50 opportunities, right? So just try, go for it. See if that helps change any perspective, but obviously don't like try for the rejection, do your best, and see how things go, but you'll probably get accepted somewhere in there. And I think, that will help build your confidence. And I also want to emphasize that, again, everyone here has either gotten into Periplus or they're a finalist for Periplus. So give yourself a reality check, right? You've won something, you've gotten accepted for something. Realize, okay, well, someone recognizes, value in my writing. So that means something. Keep that in your mental toolkit, because I can tell you, like, even for myself, no matter how many things I've won, there's still a self-doubt that comes in, even after winning an NEA fellowship. And Diana, that was your case too, right? Even after winning an NEA fellowship, I was just like, oh, but no one wants to publish my book. And is it good enough? Is it good enough? Then I had to keep, but you won an NEA. Like, you won this, you got published here. So keep those things in mind, because again, rejection, it just will happen. You can never determine, like Brett Loaf, again, like I applied like 3 times over 10 years. Yado, I applied like 3 times over 10 years to get in. Hedgebrook, I got in the first try. NEA, I got the first try. So it depends on who's judging that year, what their tastes are. You can never predict anything. So not getting accepted to something doesn't always mean that there's not the quality there. So just keep trying. And I see the 6 rejection from him. Yeah. I got like 2 other rejections from Hedgebrook after the first time, and they still owe me a week.
Yeah, but I do want to second that. I recently was a part of a jury selection for a residency, and the process is insane, right? Like, a lot of the times it has nothing to do with your like work ethic or your level. It's it's just, you know, you might have like 100 people who have a really amazing applications, and you kind of have to whittle it down to 5 people. And that in itself is like a really difficult process, but it really doesn't mean the other 95 people weren't great. You know what I mean? So I'm really glad you brought up rejection, because that kind of segues into my next question. You know, because it's not uncommon to receive more rejections than acceptances. So what would you say is the value in applying to a fellowship or a residency, even if you don't end up getting one immediately or even on the first try? And I think Kim already kind of went into that. But if Diana and Anna, if you have any, yes.
Yeah, I'll follow up on what Kim was saying. I absolutely agree. If you don't play the game, you can't win. You know, from a nonfiction perspective, I also see writing very much as a practice, right? So we have to keep doing it. And the more we do it, not only are our chances better, but it gets easier. And I think, you know, applying is part of the practice, no matter what stage you are in your career. And I also think that, you know, practicing your artist statement, practicing your understanding of your own project, which is part of a lot of these fellowship applications or residencies applications, can help you put the intention out there, can help chisel out you know, who you think you are and what you're doing. And I think, you know, one of the reasons it took me a while to get into a residency was because, you know, even though I'm a nonfiction writer, I'm like, oh God, I hate talking about myself. And the artist statement was so hard for me. And it took me a few years to really fine tune my artist statement. And it took me a long time to figure out what my memoir was really about. And all of that process of the application process, I would say, sort of narrowed me in on what those things were.
I can jump in here with another aspect. So I'll try to cover parts that maybe haven't been said. One thing is like a lot of former fellows or residents are part of the jurying process, right? So peers of various kinds of sorts within the literary community. And those are eyes reading your work, maybe eyes encountering your work for the first time. That's no small thing, right? Maybe the final decision for that specific thing, Hedgebrook or whatever, was no, sorry, we couldn't, right? But like now, X number of people have seen your work, and your like work is kind of circulating like underneath the earth, right through this like mycelium of the writers. And I think that that's actually a really wonderful thing, because you never know what will happen, right? For example, I've anecdotally, there's so many various kinds of stories. Like this is, you know, over a decade ago, but a friend really was trying to get a poem in Poetry Magazine, right? And didn't that particular time. And then maybe a year later, a former like reader for Poetry Magazine reached out because she was working on another journal and was like, I loved your poems. The editor didn't want to publish it, but I'd love to publish your work for this thing, right? So you never know who's reading, even when there's a rejection. You don't know. And then like your work is being held in somebody's mind. And I think that that's really valuable. And then the second thing that's really valuable is like most people are not working on these application materials with the same kind of intensity and care as you're working on your short story, your essay, your poem. But they also deserve multiple drafts. I'm actually teaching a class right now, professional development for MFA students, to draft these documents, your cover letter, your artist statement. And actually, Anna, it's funny because in my research for how to develop an art, because I hate my artist statement too, but it's like, how am I going to teach this? I don't know. But I had to like look up, and the exercise that I found really fruitful for the students was I'll cut and paste. So after I finish talking, I'll find it. But I had students of different genres in the program go into break rooms over Zoom and interview each other, ask each other these questions. And the person who was listening would have to type down everything the other person said. And in the end, like kind of basically offer this transcript back to the person. And these were basically questions like, oh, who are your influences? And there was something really marvelous about just having a conversation with another person and them reflecting back things you didn't realize, like you were feeling, holding, saying. And then they took those notes to help craft their artist statement, right? Because it's like hard for me to answer the question, like, what is your work about? Versus if you have more different kinds of questions that enter into that space obliquely, then you can begin to fashion. And somebody else will say, like, well, I noticed this thread from workshop plus what you just said. Did you ever think of, so it helps to have friends, peers, people who are your readers reflect back to help you develop. Sorry, now we're moving to artist statement, but I just wanted to say, like, um, to draft these things, with care. But also I had a colleague, she's done, she's a couple generations. No, she's one generation above me. But she was saying, because I was asking her for materials just to share with students, and she's like, no, I don't want to share because they're terrible. But she gave this advice. She's like, my advice for students or just people is apply, even if it's like the minute before the deadline is due, because it's better than not applying. Because she's like, sometimes she's like, I got stuff just because I just like cut and pasted something from something else. And I was like, wow, I would feel mortified, but I like that advice because it worked for you. So I'll pass that along. But it's in the same vein, right? Like, just try for it because why not?
That's great. But I did love what you had mentioned before about, because I didn't think of that kind of perspective of, your work, even if you don't get it, your work is in the room with other people, your work is being seen by other people. So that's really great. So I just wanted to like kind of just go into more of like what residencies and what those opportunities are. So, these are, residencies are like a really great dedicated time away to kind of focus on our personal projects. But I realized like some might wonder, what's the point of going away to write when I can just write at home, right? So Kim, I wanted to speak with you, as someone who's attended various residencies, has led workshops with Grub Street on this very topic. What would you say are the benefits of leaving one's home to attend a residency?
So ultimately, the community, the writing community. There are some residencies where it's like one person, or like Diana mentioned, it was two people. For me personally, that would not float my boat because I can just do that at home. I live alone. I've lived alone for years, and so I write at home. And I need to get out of my head. I need to be interacting with other people because I just go nuts if I were in my own diction for the entire time. And so I think it was Anna who mentioned, like some of the residencies, you're exposed not to just other writers, but there's dancers, musicians, visual artists. And it's just incredible to see how, just being a creative person, your process intersects and is so similar. And so I've done residencies with various different types of artists. And sometimes it's like the visual artists that I'm bonding with over the writers, right? So definitely the community aspect. And I do want to add that I was doing all these, or most of the residencies when I worked the 9 to 5 as well. And so I would actually use my vacation time. A lot of the residencies don't provide transportation or cover transportation to get there. And they're usually in remote places where like I had a residency in rural Georgia. I had to take a 2-hour taxi. The 2-hour taxi was, I think, almost as expensive as my flight to get to, it was ridiculous. But, the thing is, I said, well, I would have normally gone on a vacation. Like I probably would have spent way more money going on a cruise, right? Than to do this residency where I took this 2-hour taxi. And so for me, that was how I kind of justified it. Well, I would have spent, if I would have spent this money anyway going on vacation, then this is kind of like my vacation. So yeah, those are the big benefits that I found. And just obviously the time away, and a peaceful kind of, bucolic setting where there's no distractions. You can't, go out clubbing. You can't like do so many things because it's just like really remote and isolated.
Yes, very true. Thank you, Kim. I don't know if Anna or Diana wanted to add to that. Um,
I can add 30 seconds. I find that environment is really helpful, especially because many of us are working on big projects and, it is TDS. And so having an environment that is different from your home office or from that corner in your studio is such a gift. Being able to walk on, acres and acres of land, to not have to make your own food and not to worry about where your next meal is coming from, cuts like, at least 3 hours out of your day of planning for that stuff. I mean, most of these places that even have a cleaning lady come and clean and like give you new sheets, which is kind of amazing. So you really are not doing anything, and so you will feel guilty if you're not working. And that's part of it, right? Like that sort of environment to both see your own work in a new light, but also be in a place where you're just being taken care of. And that care comes, is a reward for all of the hard work that you've done, which is incredible. And I think that also inspires and sort of lights a fire under your butt.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, a lot of these residencies, they're kind of, kind of remove that distraction so that you're able to focus a lot. I love what was at McDowell, and for lunchtime they have someone like deliver your lunch, like a lunch basket to your studio. So so you're able to, you're able to eat all the way through, and you're not thinking about like, oh, I have to like now leave my studio to go and get food. So some of these things are like a real luxury. It's really nice to not have to be able to think about these other things. I kind of want
Can
to,
I add? Can I
yeah,
add just a couple
absolutely.
more things? Also, I remember I started crying at McDowell because I had a baby and I was the main source of care for that child. Primarily, that's how it just kind of shook out. And so when I was like, I was able to carve out like I can go for 15 days, and that's the most I can do. And it was incredible, right? Like just to have that. And I remember crying at breakfast because the hard-boiled eggs were already peeled. I didn't even have to peel them. And I was just like, oh my God, they even thought about that. I could just pop it in my mouth and run, like I know we're laughing, but like that was like just every little detail, right? To think about like how all my labor can just go towards reading and writing. I don't have to worry about anything else because they don't want me to worry about anything else. And it was just so wonderful. And then so before I had a baby, like, well, okay, there was I was like, I can peel my own eggs. But I also, when you said environment, Anna, I love going to residencies that are near bodies of water because I'm really nourished and inspired by water. So I have a harder time if I'm like landlocked with no like nearby water. And so, but there's something just about like physically traversing different terrains and how those physical environments, which are so maybe can be so different to your usual ones, um, then populate your imagination in different ways. Like I went to Willapa Bay, like right when things like everybody like literally I got my vaccine shot, and then I was able to get on a plane the next day and go to this, right when everybody started to get vaccines in the pandemic. And I was walking the shoreline because it's the largest estuary in the United States, and I was walking that every day, and that became a really integral part of like the poems that I was writing, like not on purpose. So there's a way in which also environment will begin to kind of like pop up in the work, which I think can be unexpected and lovely because you can't help but absorb it. And I love, Kim, that you have that framed leaf. Like I was just collecting like I would ultimately return it, but I would like be like, here, look at this rock, and here's a little bit of moss, and I would just like sit at my desk because like it was so I don't know, it was so lovely.
That
And
is,
I just want to add, I did not consider myself a nature person at all. And I went to Hedgebrook and I was just like, oh my God, this is amazing. And I forgot the food aspect. Yes, you just feel, I mean, not all residencies provide food, but most of them will provide at least one meal a day, so that the residents can bond together. So like it's usually required that they eat together at least one meal to just, communicate, etc. But yeah, you just feel nurtured.
awesome. And then I love that you mentioned, the sort of like conflict that you had with being a parent and having that time away. Because, a lot of these residencies, they can range in duration from like 1 week to several months. So if you have a full-time job, if you're a parent or a guardian, if you care for an elderly parent, it's often very difficult to just up and go. So what I want to ask is like, what are some things applicants should be thinking about prior to attending a residency? And what are some tips on ways to prepare for what could be a lengthy time away?
Diana just put in the chat that there are parent-friendly residencies.
Yeah.
I think maybe for the most part, a lot are not, but I would say find the ones that are. And then they have like kind of these hybrid residencies, where you're actually at home and doing things on Zoom partially, or it's a weekend retreat. But I also want to put in a huge plug for a residency that I guess, yeah, it's a residency that I did at Phillips Exeter Academy. It actually ended up being about 11 months. You're given an apartment. Food is included because it's so Phillips Exeter is a private boarding school. And the students eat in a dining hall, so you have access to the dining hall. You can bring family with you. It's one of the few long-term opportunities. There's a couple of others out there, like the Stegner Fellowship. Also the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown provides housing for you, but it's a little bit more limited. I would say with Exeter, the living space is definitely a lot bigger that you would get. So they can be a little bit harder to find, but I would say definitely look at those opportunities. And even I think some might provide childcare as well.
Yeah, go ahead, Anna.
The residency, the fellowship I got at the NEA Shearing Fellow which is connected to University of Nevada, Las Vegas, is it's a semester long fellowship, and they give you an apartment, and I bought my partner our cat. So they do exist. They are harder to find, and you do have to uproot yourself, but there's also fellowships that are remote. So it kind of depends on finding, also, where you are in your life, right? And finding the right, so it happened that was the right time for us, and we were leaving New York anyways, and so we uprooted, and then just lived rent-free for a semester, which did great things financially for us. And then I was also paid $20,000 on top of that. So those wonderful opportunities are out there. And I really didn't know about this fellowship until one of my, fellow writer friends got it. And so it is hard to know about a lot of these fellowships and residencies. So you have to do your research. And I would say, just like a tax day, maybe a research day, right?
I'll
Anna,
chime
can
in.
you get the name of that one again? I haven't heard of it.
Yeah.
Surprisingly.
Yeah, it's the Black Mountain Institute's Sharing Fellowship, which is connected to University of Nevada, Las Vegas. I was there with Jakira Diaz, Melissa Phoebos went before the semester before me. They have, it's great.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Anna. And I also want to mention that, as great as residencies are, there can be also be a very different experience for writers of color. I often think about the piece that Hannah Bay wrote in Catapult on this very topic. And in the work that I do, even with Galleyway, I post a lot of residency and fellowship opportunities. And occasionally I'll get someone in my DMs or someone who'll shoot me a reply email saying, hey, I really wouldn't recommend that residency to BIPOC writers, right? And then they kind of describe their personal experience. So I would love to know how you all have navigated the residence experience as writers of color. Is this something that you've even had to think about?
I can chime in here. I learned the hard way. Like, I have this other life too where I do textile stuff, and I did a weaving residency in Iceland for 3 months, and it was really wonderful until like basically everybody kind of left, and it was like November and getting really dark, and it was me and this one older white woman. And I think she was kind of dealing with a lot of stuff personally and maybe like psychologically, but she kind of like, it was I think this like was from her that I learned the word gaslight, and it became a terrible experience and ended with like her attacking me, and I didn't feel safe and I had to leave. And it was a new residency, and like the directors like just didn't have like guidelines or rules for how to behave. And so I was like, oh, okay. So not all residencies are great. They can be, but it really you never know. You will never know most of the time who's going to be there and what's going to happen. So that helped me to decide like, okay, well, I'm only going to go when I feel like I really need it. And it's different now because I do need to leave the house because of family and dogs and so forth, baby. But even so, I also like, it's like I talked to my network, aka friends, and I was like, where did you go? And how was it? And then they give you the scoop. And you have to pay attention, like, okay, well, everywhere you can't control who's going to be there, but how do they handle those situations? So that's helpful to know, like, is it a place that's going to take care if that's going to happen, like something bad happens? And then also, like, it's helpful to know, like, oh, that same place I went to, Willapa Bay. I remember a lot of AAPI folks were like, yeah, it's great, except you should avoid the owner who's there every day for lunch because she wants to kind of like hang out and she's really problematic. And so I knew not to hang out in the main room during certain times, and then just to hold my breath for Friday night dinner when she's there, but like I appreciated that warning because it's not great to find out through lived experience. And it's good to kind of know like how to be on guard, in that way. And unfortunately, um, places can be tremendously wonderful and also tremendously awful. It just really is a matter of circumstance. And how do we protect ourselves as in any place? But also like be there and have the fruitful writing experience, that we deserve and that we write. So yeah, thanks for listening to that.
Of course. Thank you for sharing. I'm so sorry you even had to go through that. But I will say it's not uncommon. I've heard that quite a bit. And I've also heard kind of what you've said, that there are these organizations where you kind of bring up like, hey, this is what has happened. And there isn't really any like protocols on how to deal with these sort of things. So that's something to also think about when we're like applying for these opportunities. Like, are these the type of organizations that kind of have these protocols in place and are able to understand what writers of color have to go through in these situations? I do remember like applying for one residency and the executive director saying, you got in, but I also want to let you know that like this is Trump country, so we're surrounded by that. And so if you don't want to come, I definitely understand, but I just wanted to like put that out there. And I appreciated it, but it was just like, okay, thank you for at least you kind of recognize what is out there and what we have to think about. So I did want to just kind of segue into a different topic about creative writing workshops versus MFA programs. Um, and I think this is kind of for those writers who want to continue working on their craft but are not sure whether to apply for a workshop or whether to go the MFA route. Um, so kind of, I just wanted to see if anyone would be able to discuss like, what's the difference between a workshop and an MFA program, and what should writers kind of look or keep in mind when applying to one, whether it's like topic, instructor, class size, class structure or size. Um, and Kim or Diana, if anyone else wants to speak on that, you can as well.
I mean, I can just say very quickly, MFA, really the purpose of an MFA is to teach creative writing. It used to be considered a terminal degree, but now, for the past many years, there's been a PhD in creative writing, and that's become the thing that you need to get. So if you're not necessarily gung-ho about teaching writing, I myself was never wanting to teach writing. I just wanted to hone my craft. The thing about an MFA is that you're typically not just taking like workshops and crafts classes, you're also taking like English literature classes, which for me, I didn't find useful at all because I'm like, I don't want to be a literary theorist. I want to write and develop my craft. So I think the benefit of individual workshops is that you do get to focus more on the techniques of writing. And I would just say that, as you're trying to find something, just making sure that, for whatever level that you're at, that it's fitting, what you want, because there's some workshops that are going to be more basic and some more advanced, so just being cognizant of that. But I think, taking individual workshops, I always say, like, all the famous writers that you read in high school, none of these people had MFAs, right? Because MFA didn't even exist until a certain point. So how did those people know how to write novels or short stories or poetry or whatever? They read, right? And that was their education. So make sure that obviously you're reading in the genres that you're interested in writing. That's the utmost important thing that you can do. And then the workshops will help for getting feedback, on your writing from your peers, but also an instructor who should have some more experience with it. So that's my take.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think that I think cost is often a big consideration. And I think Kim is absolutely right. Unless you're thinking of teaching, you don't necessarily need an MFA program. There are also alternatives. So, for example, look at low-res MFA programs. They're amazing. I teach at one in New Hampshire, and it's much lower of a stakes, right? So you can have your full-time job, you have your writing community, you have the degree, and you have mentorship. So think about other ways in which you can get that immersion if that's what you want. And then, I also teach in the book project, which is connected to Lighthouse. That's another sort of program. It's a 2-year immersion program with the focus of coming out with a book. So it's really about what your goal is. Why do you want an MFA, and what is that going to give you? And the costs that are tied to it, because remember, you can, I went to Sarah Lawrence, and oh my God, it's so expensive. And a lot, Tin House, their advances for a book is $1,000, $2,000. That is not going to cover your MFA from Sarah Lawrence. So and that limits you when you have such a high student loan afterwards.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, yes to everything
Yeah.
that Kim and Anna said. I'll also add here, oh my gosh, I'm actually very sick, so my brain is a little foggy. Another reason would be because you want to work with that person, right? You really want, but there's no guarantee. So there's that thing too, right? There's no guarantee unless like that person calls you and says like, we're gonna do it. Like you and me, we're gonna work on that together. Even in a low res, I also teach in a low res, like I don't get to decide which writers I'm matched with for each semester. But that's another one. So yeah, thinking about money, right? Like for all of these kinds of opportunities, hoping and trying to apply for scholarships and fellowships. I mean, I went to Columbia, which is also really expensive. And too, and I went there because my undergrad mentor was like, well, these are the ones you should go to based on just people. And he wasn't wrong, but I don't advise people to take out debt, for an MFA degree, especially in poetry, which there's almost no money in for most people. So yeah, I mean, you could just also, yeah, DIY. That's what I say too. How can you actively engage in literary community? That's really the main thing. And if you struggle to have access to it, right, outside of applying for stuff, then maybe you might consider doing one. But you can really go it your own way, but you have to be proactive. And I think that's actually even better. So
Yeah, these are all great points. And I think it all just kind of boils down to where someone is in their life and what they need. And they can cut. So I love that there's all these different opportunities. There's all these different ways that, people can get involved in either continuing their education or, uh, doing other things.
I just wanted to add very quickly that my MFA was very inexpensive, actually,
Mm.
but it wasn't like the superstar, faculty, and very few people have heard of my program, but all to say that there are other workshops, like the 10 houses or the Fine Arts Work Center that you can take, and there's scholarships. Like I didn't have money, so I was getting scholarships left and right. So like the Fine Arts Work Center, I got a scholarship that covered not only the workshop fee, but also living expenses. And so I had a workshop with Elizabeth Strout. I didn't even know this was before Olive Kitters, but I had no idea who she was. I was like, this works with my timeline. I'm getting the scholarship. I'm going by hook or crook. I'm going. And then I had this amazing workshop and, got to know this person who was outside of my my MFA experience. So there are ways to work with certain writers or faculty, that might be even easier than doing the MFA program.
Awesome. And Kim, would you mind putting your program in the chat just so other folks?
I don't even know if it exists anymore.
Okay, no.
So I'll put it, research it before you go.
Okay, no
We
problem.
still
I
do
don't think there's
summer.
any funding.
Provincetown still
Um,
does these like week-long summer kind of
Well, yeah,
fellowship.
Provincetown, but my MFA program, you
Oh,
mean,
sorry. Yes.
Camille?
Yeah, the MFA,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
Don't worry. If you can, it's totally fine.
I also want to say, my MFA program, it was highly, highly unusual because it was the only, maybe there was one other, but probably the only predominantly Black creative writing MFA program. We haven't really talked about race in terms of workshops and MFAs, but that was really important to me. So I did want the superstar professors, but it was also, I had heard so many horror stories about the workshop experience from friends of color, who was like, oh, you're right, your character's writing in dialect, they're speaking bad English, or we can't critique your story because we don't understand your character's experience because of race, but it's like, you can't critique the craft. And so for me, that was really important. And I got that element. I never had anyone, say dumb things about race, et cetera, in my workshops. So there's that as well.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, sorry. I also wanted to put in a plug, for so the independent workshop. So there's like Kimbilio, if you're Black, of the Black diaspora, there's Kundiman, there's Kaveh Khanum, there is and yeah, a host that I'm probably forgetting. So there are these spaces, based on different identities that you can do. But also to say that it's not always a guarantee that just because this is meeting your identity, that you're going to have a positive experience or people are going to relate to you. So I found in my personal experience, it's kind of hit or miss.
Thank you, Kim. I think in the interest of time, I'm just gonna move into like applications and the application process. So I'll say that, individuals applying to workshop fellowships and residencies will often be prompted to submit different materials to their application. So what are the typical materials that writers and poets should have on hand? And what are some tips in crafting strong materials that could help one's application stand out? So Kim, if you don't mind, I'll start with you, if you can talk about artist statements, then I'll move on to Diana about project proposals and Anna about writing samples.
So yeah, there's the artist statements, but I'll also just briefly mention project proposal because sometimes there can be crossover in between. I always say, basically just follow whatever instructions you're given. That's the utmost important thing that you can do for these applications. Don't try to be cutesy. Well, they said 500 words, but I'm going to put 1,000 to show that I'm really enthusiastic. No, just follow the instructions. If they say the first paragraph should be about this, this, and this, they've already, they've solved your problem. So just follow the instructions, whatever they're asking for. They'll usually prompt you, in terms of what that artist statement should reveal about yourself. And I think Diana and Anna gave some really good tips before, for figuring out how to write about yourself in that statement.
I'll chime in here, just to avoid some any lag. It should be very clear. Extremely clear that people in any genre can understand and read it, because sometimes jurors might be not even writers. You don't even know. And so, yeah, I remember one time I had a grad student share with me their, I think it was a project proposal, but it was incoherent because it was like an experimental poem. And I was like, no, that's not the right genre, right? Yes, to what Kim said, follow the rules and follow it to a T. Don't deviate. You don't want to stand out in that way. You want to stand out by being so clear and undeniably exigent, right? This is why you should have this thing now, right? Maybe an artist statement isn't the right thing for that, but project proposal might be a place. But again, like explaining it in terms that people in any genre, like people could understand it and read it. Yeah, so
I guess I'll just reiterate, read the guidelines. And I'm even going to go as far as to say, go to an info session, right? Like now info sessions, you can just put it on Zoom and just put, do, I don't know, cook dinner and then just listen to what it is that they want exactly. In terms of writing samples, I would say follow the guidelines to a T, and also your best work, right? Just I would say read carefully and make sure you do read. So some of you might be applying to a bunch of things. It's worth your time to do your research and be vigilant about figuring out what they want. So for example, writing samples, sometimes they don't want you to have your name on the documents. Make sure you're not sending them something with your name on it because they want anonymity for a reason. So things like that, really important.
Wonderful. Thank you. And then I'll just do my final question before we kind of move into Q&A. So I kind of want to pull the veil back on a little bit on that process. So you all have served on juries and selection committees for fellowships and residencies. So can you offer a little insight on what that process is like, and what would you say institutions and organizations are looking for when selecting a candidate or application?
So I was going to say, it's been a really helpful experience to serve as a judge because then I'm, seeing from the other side, like what the judges go through. And I always tell people who are applying, try to put yourself in the judge's shoes, knowing that this person is getting anywhere from like sometimes 50 to 100, maybe even more applications that they're reviewing. And so sometimes for me, especially with like fiction writing samples, I would say submit something that's longer. Like if you write flash fiction, it's probably not the best because, the judge is having to like switch and switch and switch and switch. If you can, like, let's say they ask for a 25-page sample and you have something that's like 23 pages, maybe just submit that. Don't submit some other little 2-page, thing, because you want to basically, and also beginning, middle, end, keep it simple, because the thing is, the person is reading so many submissions. And I know, like, for me, after a while, it's just like, okay, sometimes you're told, maybe you can only, you only have to read about the first 3 pages. And even in those first 3 pages, sometimes, like I can't read the rest because I can't even make sense of what's going on with this submission. So something that's engaging, it pulls you in. You don't need a lot of explanation. This comes from like chapter 36 of my novel. So I need to like explain, in this like kind of summary chapter, bring us in, build the story, bring us into the story right away, and then leave us with a hook, because as a judge, there have been samples that I've read and I'm like, wait, who is this? Oh, it's anonymous. Oh my God, like I want to finish this book. Oh my God, it's so good. It's so good. Right. So thinking in that vein, I think that's pretty helpful. And like I think Anna mentioned, and probably Diana as well, but knowing what the organization's mission is really essential. For me, everything from like Fulbright on, especially for your statements, you want to emphasize, if this is an organization that says, community service is really important to us, and we expect you to do, like readings in schools, et cetera, you want to emphasize your experience and interest in those things.
Yeah, and I think one thing is don't get discouraged easily. A lot of this, sometimes it's not about you. I was on the Periplus matching committee this year. And with an organization like Periplus, it really depends on who's mentoring, right? And we're trying to also match the right mentor to the right mentee. So with Periplus, there's a scoring system, and some of that is really by need. So we do read the application and score. And then, you know, we look at your writing sample, and then we score that as well. And so a lot of that process is done by different people. So you might be read by one writer, but who is also looking over your application that may be scoring differently. And then it might be like, do we have a mentor for you that is going to match your needs? And so, you know, just keep trying and don't give up, and don't try to assume to know the process. There's a lot that, you know, not only you can't control, but we, the judges, can't even control.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think reflecting on the different things that I've read for, primarily, I feel like I was only just reading work samples, you know? And I remember for one of them, I think this was for the Key West literary seminars in Key West in January, which is really lovely, highly recommend. But they literally were like, you can only have one ranked 20 out of that batch. Like, how random? Like, what if you have a gazillion 20s, you know? And then I had to only judge it according to that batch, which was really heartbreaking. Yeah, so I would write a lot in the notes, especially if I had one that was like, this one's 19, but like, you know, so again, it's arbitrary. I understand that they have to just like, but I'm not the only one reading it, so it's multiple people reading it, so then it's an average. So it's kind of luck in some ways too, you know, and you kind of hope statistically it works out in your favor. But yeah, I would say like, but you know, I've read materials for other things like, you know, I read admissions every year for an MFA program, and you just want to have immaculate materials where like there's like a through line of an ethos from, you know, the personal statement to, if it has a project proposal, to the writing sample. Like it's like, oh, I see this person, I see their trajectory, or I see what they're saying, and it's legible and it's illuminating and it's compelling. So I want to pick them, right? Um, yeah.
I also want to quickly put in a plug for the National Endowment for the Arts Literature Fellowship, which I know, especially if you have imposter syndrome, it can be very intimidating because they award $25,000. Okay. And I had to get my butt kicked by a friend of mine who said, apply. And I was like, me, because I was on a 3-year rejection streak, like everything I applied to, residencies, fellowships, agents, I got rejected for 3 solid years. So my morale was pretty low. And my friend was like, just apply, just stop complaining and apply. And the thing is, I'm plugging it because a lot of people might assume that I need a published book. The thing is, you can you can apply if you have a published book, you know, within a certain time period, or for fiction and poetry, you need a certain number of publications within a certain number of years. And it's not necessarily that many. And also, I want to really emphasize that it does not have to be in the same genre if you're doing fiction or nonfiction. So let's say you're submitting for fiction, because it's different years, fiction, creative, nonfiction, poetry. You're submitting for fiction like I was. Most of my publications that I had were for creative nonfiction memoir. Okay, and that qualified me. So I got this before my published book. I won $25,000, which, as Anna mentioned, is more than some people get for their book advance. This was for a 30-page sample, okay? So I want to emphasize, and I have met so many writers who have a book, because I think it was 5 publications at least that you need over 7 years. They have a book and they qualify and they don't apply because they're like, oh, but who would give me? I'm just like, I want to strangle you. Do you know how long I waited to have a book? And I did apply for my book, and I'll tell you that I got rejected this past year from my book. But I'm going to apply again in 2 years. So I want to put that out there, especially if you have the minimum publications. I'm like, bring me your neck if you don't apply, because that is $25,000 waiting there. And that money is unrestricted. Okay, did I mention that? It's unrestricted. So then you can do a residency and pay for the exorbitant fees to travel there. You can create your own residency. You can pay your rents. So yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Kim, Anna, and Diana. This was like, thank you for that. It's like really great insight into that process. And I did want to kind of just like open it up now to questions. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat. You can also use the raise hand function and I'll get to you. There was a question a little earlier from Kiera. Kiera, would you mind just going off mute and just asking the question? Because I'm not quite sure I understand what you mean regarding um, publishing for first
Sure.
public.
So I just wanted to clarify, like for so I have, some minor publications at smaller journals, that sort of thing. No book publications. It seems like it may have come up naturally already. But I'm very intimidated applying to fellowships about not having a laundry list or a large I guess resume going on. So for these fellowships and residencies that I guess at what point or where were you kind of in your career when you got your first, let's say, big one or significant one as far as publishing and that sort of thing?
Can I just quickly say that when I got to McDowell off the wait list, I was accepted to McDowell off the wait list. I had had my NEA, my NIFA, my this, my that, publications left and right. And there was a writer there who had like one publication, who got in on the first try to McDowell, not on the wait list. So I would say the most important thing is the sample that they're not necessarily looking at your full resume. It's the quality of the sample that you submit, how serious you are as a writer, how, like someone said already, like, why do you need to be there at that time, working on this particular project? If that shines through and, you get that nice combination of judges who agree with your work, then to me, that's all that matters.
I guess kind of a follow-up to that and to looking at these programs is something that are tangential adjacent is something that I've been kind of interested in, concerned about as I've been applying to MFA programs and hearing back from them is this idea of losing your voice in those, because I think that like all the poets who come out of NYU do have a similar thing going on. And then where I've heard positively from, I've just been surprised at those schools versus like other ones. But I think that my writing's a little more avant-garde anyways. So I guess like TLDR of that question is just how do you juggle keeping your distinct sense of identity in these residencies or fellowships and like
not to be pessimistic, but I would say if someone is losing their voice, maybe their voice wasn't strong to begin with, that they're, influenced by these other things. It's kind of the same thing when I hear writers say like, oh, I can't read books when I'm writing because I'll get influenced by that thing. And, maybe you haven't found the voice, and you're not confident about the voice that you have. Yeah, I would say, yeah. And yeah, I mean, I think, with I see the same thing with fiction. I see a lot of novels getting published in first person, and I call it the MFA voice, where they all sound like they have an MFA, not even in fiction, but poetry. Like, seriously, everyone talks this way. I've never met, I met like 5 people who talk this way. But I think, again, like, if you're true to your voice and you're confident about that, it's going to be really hard for someone to come in and sway, but realizing that you do change and you grow. So that's all part of it. But yeah, you just have to have that confidence about your voice and find your people, find the people who resonate with your voice, even if it is experimental.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kiera. There's another question in the chat from Sarah. I believe this is for like applications. They say that a question for prose writers for shorter writing samples, 5 to 10 pages. What are your thoughts on excerpts versus self-contained stories? So they're saying for writing samples, what's the best? Is there a better format to submit, especially if it's a short, 5 to 10 pages? Should they submit excerpts, or should they send in more self-contained, like short stories or excerpts?
In my opinion, I think it's always your best work, unless you're applying to a program like the book project and you're like, and then we want to see a sample of the book that you are working on and basing your application on.
Okay. Thank you, Anna. There's another question. This one is for Kim. Said, could you talk a little bit about applying for the Fulbright?
Yeah, so Fulbrights, basically there's a lot of different Fulbrights, but the one that I did was for research. There is a creative one where you can apply for writing, which I didn't do because I was more doing the research for my novel. So God, there's so much. Go to an info session. Definitely make use of the info session because it is a very involved and very rigorous, intense process. I applied, I think I was 2 years out of undergrad when I applied, and I had kept in touch with my professors, which was really essential because they all read my statement and ripped it to shreds and handed it back to me. And, I honed and honed and honed because so Fulbright is another one of these opportunities where they give you roughly like, well, I don't know what it is now, but let's say like $20,000 or more to go abroad. Either do research, they have teaching English opportunities, there's creative opportunities. Basically you have to write a personal statement, part of it as well. And then it's like 2 statements that you're submitting and they total like less than like 2 pages. It's like ridiculously short. So you have to be super concise and squeeze in so much in those statements, and maybe even do some background research, etc. But I would definitely say you want to do the info sessions, and then get any guidance from faculty members, especially if you're doing research. If you're looking at organizations within the country, sometimes you have to get a sponsorship. But yeah, there's just so much with Fulbright. So definitely look at the information sessions and ask questions also.
I can add something for the Fulbright. I've had lots of friends who've done it. So like I would also like look at their different statements because there's so many different kinds of documents. And the other thing too is like start that application really early, especially if you're doing a research one, because you need to find a hosting institution. And that takes time to just cold email like different, scholars, etc. If you're going to do research. So but yeah, trying to get as many resources as you can, sample stuff. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Diana. Cara in the chat asked, how do you feel confident about your artist statement? Do your artist statements or proposals evolve the more you write? And how do you adjust to those changes in your applications?
I feel like that for me, there was an evolution and I just got, a little bit more confident each time I worked on it, each year, basically each year I updated it. And that's how I was doing it. So, as Diana was saying, if you have a tax day, right, a day that you're doing research and you're going to be applying to, like, I have an Excel sheet of like, 2024, these are the ones I applied to. 2023, these are the ones I applied to. And every year there's a period. So I would update mine annually. And I think there is an evolution. And part of it is that you get more and more comfortable talking about yourself as an artist. I actually think the poets are the best at it. And for me, it has been an evolution and I think it continues to be an evolution. And, the more work that we publish, the more it evolves. And I hope that it changes year after year.
Thank you, Anna.
Yeah, I would say the same. And also if you've ever written a cover letter for a job, an artist statement is kind of like a cover letter where, you know, you have kind of like a template that you might use, and then you kind of tweak it depending on the job that you're applying for. And as you're gaining more skills, you're just continually tweaking it, but you have that basic foundation so that you're not reinventing the wheel every time.
That's a great analogy. Thank you, Kim. I'm just gonna read. I think we have time for just one more. This is from Laura. They ask, doesn't the cycle of people who were accepted becoming judges kind of perpetuate a homogeneous voice? And I think Diana, you might have mentioned something, you might have responded. So I don't know if you want to say that out loud for all.
Oh yeah, sure. I would say not necessarily. You never know what will draw people in. For example, I won a poetry award at the Key West Literary Seminars, and my work veers a little bit more towards the experimental, and Billy Collins chose me. I'd never in my life would have thought this like wealthy white man who writes humorous poems would have chosen me. Like you just don't, you don't know. Of course, sure, there's screeners who probably like narrowed it down for him, but we just don't know. We don't always read the kind of work that we write, right? So, no, yeah, that's my response there.
Yeah.
I would just second that and say, yes, you never know. And I would just say, don't assume, like everyone was saying, submit your best work, and you just never know who it will resonate with. The judges panels change every year. But I also want to put out a plug for the Jerome Foundation. If you're in Minnesota or New York, that is one organization I've judged for that was like super, super committed to diversity in all forms. They were emphasizing every step of the way. We need this many people, these types of everything from like race, ethnicity, gender, sexual identity, disability status, like everything, right? So yes, you can look at organizations like that, but again, just never assume anything.
Absolutely. So I think that kind of concludes our event. Thank you so much. These were really great questions. I want a special thank you to our panelists for offering really great insight into the application process, into residencies, into fellowships and workshops. So please enjoy the rest of your night, and be sure to check out Galleyway for upcoming opportunities. Thank you. We'll see you.
Good night. Hope you apply.
Thank you.